Picture this. You spend 7 years building something from nothing, pouring your expertise into every line of code, every security protocol, every automated process that keeps a multi-million-dollar operation running smoothly. Then one day, someone in an expensive suit decides they can replace you with a cheaper alternative halfway around the world. They think systems are just systems, that code is just code, that anyone with basic technical skills can maintain what you've created. They're about to learn that some foundations can't be replicated, and some expertise can't be outsourced. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Chen, and I need you to understand something about the world of enterprise technology that most people never see. When you log into your insurance company's website, when you file a claim online, when your premium gets automatically calculated and your payment processes seamlessly, there's an invisible architecture making all of that possible. It's not magic, and it's not some plug-and-play system you can buy off the shelf. It's custom-built, carefully integrated, and requires someone who understands not just how each piece works, but how every piece connects to every other piece. I'm 38 years old, and until exactly 2 months and 3 days ago, I was the lead systems administrator at Midwest Insurance Solutions here in Chicago. That title doesn't really capture what I did, though. I wasn't just maintaining systems that someone else had built. I was the architect, the engineer, and the guardian of every digital process that kept their $200 million operation functioning day after day, year after year. 7 years ago, when I first walked into Midwest's downtown offices on West Jackson Boulevard, the company was drowning in inefficiency. They had separate systems for everything: customer management, claims processing, underwriting, billing, compliance reporting. Nothing talked to anything else. Employees were manually entering the same data into multiple systems. Reports that should have taken minutes were taking hours. Simple claims were getting lost in the shuffle for weeks. The previous IT administrator had quit after 6 months, leaving behind what I can only describe as digital chaos. Servers that hadn't been properly configured, databases that weren't optimized, security protocols that were more suggestion than protection. The CEO at the time, Robert Martinez, pulled me aside after my first week and said something I'll never forget. "Jessica, I don't understand computers, but I know this place is broken. Can you fix it?" That's when I realized I wasn't just taking a job, I was taking on a complete reconstruction project. Over the next 18 months, working nights and weekends, I didn't just fix their systems, I rebuilt them entirely. I designed a unified architecture where every component was purpose-built for Midwest-specific needs. Customer data flowed seamlessly between departments. Claims processing became automated for routine cases. Underwriting calculations that used to take days were completed in minutes. But here's what made my approach different, and what would become crucial later. I built redundancy and control into every system. In the technology world, we call them administrative backdoors, and they're absolutely standard practice. These aren't security vulnerabilities or hidden exploits. They're legitimate administrative tools that allow system architects to maintain, troubleshoot, and protect the infrastructure we've created. Every major system I designed included master access protocols that only I controlled. When the automated billing system needed to reconcile thousands of payments each month, it relied on background processes that required my authentication. When the customer database performed its nightly optimization routines, those routines used algorithms I had written and secured. When the compliance reporting system generated the monthly statements that kept Midwest in good standing with state regulators, it pulled data through integration layers that I had specifically configured. This wasn't about job security or creating dependencies. It was about responsible system architecture. When you build something complex and mission-critical, you need ways to maintain it efficiently. You need to be able to diagnose problems quickly, implement fixes safely, and ensure that unauthorized changes can't compromise the entire system. The backdoors I implemented were my way of maintaining the integrity of what I had built. I documented everything meticulously. Every system design, every integration protocol, every administrative procedure was carefully recorded in my personal technical files. I followed industry best practices, maintained proper security standards, and kept detailed logs of every modification I made. The difference was that these documentation files were stored on my personal encrypted drives, separate from the company's general IT documentation. This wasn't unusual. Most system architects maintain their own comprehensive technical libraries, because company documentation systems are rarely sophisticated enough to capture the full complexity of custom-built infrastructure. For 5 years, my systems ran flawlessly. Midwest's operational efficiency improved dramatically. Customer satisfaction scores rose. Regulatory compliance became routine rather than stressful. The company grew from a regional player to a significant presence in the Midwest insurance market, and much of that growth was enabled by the technological foundation I had created. I trained junior administrators, taught them how to handle routine maintenance tasks, and gradually built a small but capable IT team. But I remained the only person who understood the complete system architecture, the only one who could troubleshoot complex integration issues, and the only one with access to the administrative protocols that kept everything running smoothly. Then Robert Martinez retired, and everything changed. The new leadership brought in David Morrison as Chief Operating Officer, and from the moment he walked through our doors, I could see what was coming. David had a shiny MBA from Northwestern, a background in management consulting, and absolutely no understanding of how technology actually works in the real world. He saw IT as a cost center, not as the foundational infrastructure that enabled everything else the company did. David spoke in buzzwords and lived in spreadsheets. He talked about optimizing operational efficiency through strategic cost reduction and, quote, leveraging global talent markets for competitive advantage. What he meant was outsourcing, and he made no secret of his intentions. Within his first month, he was requesting detailed documentation of every process I managed, asking pointed questions about system dependencies, and scheduling meetings with offshore consulting firms. I wasn't paranoid. I was experienced. I had seen this playbook before at other companies, and I knew exactly how it would unfold. David would identify the highest-paid technical positions, research cheaper alternatives, and then present his cost-saving initiatives to the board as evidence of his strategic value. The fact that those savings might come at the expense of system stability, institutional knowledge, and operational effectiveness wouldn't show up on his quarterly reports. So I started preparing, not for sabotage, not for revenge, but for the inevitable moment when David would discover that some things can't be outsourced as easily as he imagined. I updated my personal documentation, ensuring that every system I had built was thoroughly mapped in my private technical files. I reviewed my employment contract, paying particular attention to intellectual property clauses and proprietary system access rights. I made sure my encrypted backup drives contained complete records of every custom process, every integration protocol, and every administrative backdoor I had implemented over the years. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what I knew was coming. I had built something remarkable at Midwest, something that had transformed the company and enabled its success. But I also knew that in David's world, the person who builds something is less valuable than the person who finds a way to maintain it for less money. The end came on a rainy Tuesday morning in early March. David's assistant, Jennifer, called me into the large conference room on the 15th floor. The room with the mahogany table and the view of Lake Michigan, the room where important decisions were made and delivered. David was already there, sitting across from a folder that I immediately recognized as a termination package. He didn't waste time with small talk or false sympathy. "Jessica, we're restructuring the IT department," he said, sliding the folder across the polished table. "We've partnered with TechFlow Solutions in Mumbai. They're going to handle all of your current responsibilities at 60% of the cost." He delivered this news like he was reading from a prepared script. No acknowledgement of what I had built. No recognition of the 7 years I had spent transforming Midwest's technological capabilities. No mention of the countless nights and weekends I had invested in creating systems that had directly enabled the company's growth and success. "Your last day will be Friday," he continued. "Please have all passwords and access codes documented for the transition team. Jennifer will handle the details of your severance package." I looked at the folder, then back at David. His expression was completely neutral, like he was discussing a routine vendor change rather than eliminating the person who had built and maintained the digital foundation of the entire company. "I understand," I said calmly. "Is there anything specific you need from me during the transition?" David seemed relieved by my professional response. He probably expected anger, or pleading, or some kind of emotional reaction. Instead, I was already calculating what would happen next. "Just the usual handoff documentation," he replied. "The TechFlow team is very experienced. They'll be able to take over seamlessly." I nodded and picked up the folder. "I'll have everything prepared by Friday." As I walked back to my office, passing the server room I had designed, the workstations I had configured, and the infrastructure that hummed quietly while processing thousands of transactions every hour, I realized that David had made a fundamental miscalculation. He thought he was cutting a cost. What he had actually done was sever the connection between Midwest and the only person who truly understood how their digital nervous system functioned. The irony was that David was absolutely right about one thing. TechFlow could handle routine IT maintenance for 60% of my salary. They could reset passwords, monitor system alerts, and follow standard troubleshooting procedures. What they couldn't do was maintain the custom-built integration layers, the proprietary optimization routines, and the sophisticated automation processes that require deep understanding of how every component connected to every other component. More critically, they would have no access to the administrative backdoors that those systems relied on to function properly. The master authentication protocols, the background maintenance routines, the security validation processes, all of these had been designed to require my specific access credentials. Not because I was trying to create job security, but because that's how responsible system architecture works when you're building something mission-critical from the ground up. Over the next 3 days, I methodically prepared for my departure. I met with each member of my team, explaining the basic maintenance procedures they would need to handle after I left. I documented standard passwords and access procedures for routine systems. I organized my office files and prepared to hand over the basic operational information that TechFlow would need to begin their work. What I didn't hand over were the master system architecture files, the complete integration documentation, or the administrative credentials that controlled the deeper layers of the infrastructure. Those files remained in my personal encrypted drives, separate from company property and accessible only to me. This wasn't theft or sabotage. These were my personal technical files, developed using my own expertise and stored on my own equipment. The systems themselves belonged to Midwest, but the detailed knowledge of how to maintain and modify them belonged to the person who had built them. David was welcome to try to reverse engineer what I had created, but he would quickly discover that some knowledge can't be easily transferred or replicated. On Friday morning, I cleaned out my desk while my former colleagues watched nervously. They understood what David didn't, that I wasn't just another employee leaving. I was the institutional memory of how Midwest's technology actually worked. Sarah from customer service stopped by to say goodbye, looking genuinely worried. "Are you sure they'll be able to keep everything running?" she asked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I smiled and gave her the only honest answer I could. "I'm sure they'll do their best." I handed my laptop and access badge to Jennifer, along with a folder containing basic system passwords and standard operating procedures. I walked through the office one last time, saying goodbye to people I had worked with for 7 years, people who had relied on me to keep their digital tools functioning smoothly day after day. Then I walked out of Midwest Insurance Solutions for what I thought would be the last time, knowing that TechFlow was about to inherit something they didn't understand, couldn't properly maintain, and would struggle to keep running without the knowledge and access that walked out the door with me. David Morrison thought he had just saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in salary costs. What he had actually done was disconnect Midwest from the only person who understood how to keep their digital foundations stable. The TechFlow team in Mumbai was competent and experienced, but they were about to discover that maintaining someone else's custom-built system architecture requires more than technical skills. It requires the knowledge that can't be documented in standard procedures, the understanding that comes from building something yourself, and the access credentials that only the original architect possesses. David would learn this lesson, but not until his cost-saving initiative had created problems that would cost far more than my salary ever did. As I drove home through the Chicago traffic that Friday afternoon, I wasn't angry or vindictive. I was simply realistic about what would happen next. The systems I had built were sophisticated and interconnected. They would continue functioning for a while on their automated routines, but eventually they would begin to degrade without proper maintenance. And when that happened, TechFlow would discover that some expertise can't be outsourced, and some knowledge can't be easily replaced. The consequences of David's decision would unfold gradually, but they would be inevitable. Because when you build something complex and mission-critical, and then you remove the person who understands how it really works, you're not saving money. You're just postponing the cost until it becomes much more expensive to fix. For the first week after my departure, everything at Midwest Insurance Solutions appeared to function exactly as David Morrison had predicted. The TechFlow team in Mumbai had taken over basic system monitoring responsibilities, and from the outside, the transition looked seamless. David sent a company-wide email on Wednesday, praising the smooth operational handoff and highlighting the, quote, immediate cost benefits being realized through strategic workforce optimization. The Indian team was genuinely competent. Led by Rajesh Kumar, a systems engineer with 15 years of experience, they had quickly familiarized themselves with the surface-level operations of Midwest's infrastructure. They could monitor server performance metrics, respond to basic user requests, and handle routine maintenance tasks like password resets and software updates. For standard IT support functions, they were actually quite efficient. But what Rajesh and his team didn't realize was that they were only seeing the tip of an enormous technological iceberg. The systems I had built over 7 years weren't just collections of separate applications running on servers. They were interconnected organisms, with complex dependencies and automated processes that required constant communication between different layers of the infrastructure. Take the customer database, for example. On the surface, it looked like a straightforward customer relationship management system. Users could log in, view client information, update records, and generate basic reports. The TechFlow team could monitor its performance, ensure backups were running, and handle simple user support issues. What they couldn't see was the intricate web of background processes that kept that database optimized and efficient. Every night at 2 a.m., the system ran a comprehensive optimization routine that analyzed data patterns, reorganized indexes, and cleaned up redundant entries. This process didn't just happen automatically. It required authentication from my administrative backdoor to access the deep database structures where this maintenance occurred. Without that authentication, the optimization routine would skip critical steps, leaving the database to gradually slow down as data accumulated and indexes became fragmented. Similarly, the automated billing system that processed premium payments looked straightforward from the user interface perspective. Customers could log in, view their bills, and make payments online. The TechFlow team could monitor transaction volumes and ensure the payment gateway was functioning. But the background reconciliation process that matched payments to customer accounts and updated billing statuses relied on complex algorithms I had written specifically for Midwest's business rules. These algorithms didn't just process payments. They had to account for Midwest's unique policy structures, handle partial payments according to specific business rules, manage grace periods for different customer categories, and generate the detailed reconciliation reports that the accounting department relied on for their monthly closing procedures. All of this processing happened through background services that required my administrative access to function properly. David Morrison saw IT costs as line items on a spreadsheet. He understood that paying a team in Mumbai was cheaper than paying me. What he didn't understand was that the value I provided wasn't just technical support. It was the deep institutional knowledge of how every piece of Midwest's digital infrastructure connected to every other piece, and the administrative access required to keep those connections functioning smoothly. Rajesh was an experienced systems administrator but he was working with someone else's architecture. He could follow standard procedures for routine maintenance, but he couldn't modify or troubleshoot the custom integration layers that made Midwest's systems work together seamlessly. More critically, he had no way to access the administrative backdoors that those integration layers depended on. The first hint of trouble came exactly 8 days after my departure. Sarah Martinez in customer service called the TechFlow support line to report that the automated customer notification system seemed to be malfunctioning. Customers were receiving payment confirmation emails, but the messages were missing critical information, like policy numbers and payment amounts. Rajesh investigated the issue and found that the email template system was functioning normally. The problem was more subtle. The notification system pulled customer data from multiple sources and compiled it into personalized messages. This compilation process relied on a background service that I had designed to maintain data consistency across different systems. Without my administrative authentication, this service was reverting to a basic mode that could generate emails but couldn't access the detailed customer information needed to make them useful. Rajesh spent 6 hours troubleshooting what he thought was a template configuration issue. He found workarounds that allowed the system to generate more complete notifications, but his solution required manual intervention for each customer category. What should have been an automated process now required daily manual updates to function properly. Meanwhile, the claims processing system was experiencing similar degradation. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Claims adjusters could log into the system, review case files, and update claim statuses. But the automated routing system that assigned claims to appropriate adjusters based on expertise and workload was beginning to malfunction. This routing system was one of my most sophisticated creations. It analyzed claim types, adjuster specializations, current caseloads, and even geographic factors to ensure that each claim was handled by the most qualified available person in the most efficient manner possible. The algorithm learned from historical data, adjusted for seasonal patterns, and constantly optimized its decision-making to improve overall department performance. But the learning algorithms required periodic access to deep system data that only my administrative backdoors could provide. Without this access, the system gradually lost its ability to make intelligent routing decisions. Claims were still being assigned, but they were being distributed randomly rather than strategically. Experienced adjusters were getting routine cases, while complex claims were being assigned to junior staff who weren't equipped to handle them efficiently. Jennifer Walsh in the claims department noticed that her caseload seemed heavier than usual, but she assumed it was just a busy period. She didn't realize that the system was no longer balancing workloads effectively. Tom Rodriguez, a senior adjuster with expertise in commercial property claims, found himself handling routine automotive cases while complex commercial claims were being assigned to adjusters who had to research unfamiliar regulations and procedures. The efficiency degradation was gradual but measurable. Claims that should have been resolved in 5 days were taking 7 or 8. Customer satisfaction scores began to decline slightly as response times increased. But these changes were subtle enough that they didn't trigger immediate alarm bells. David Morrison was focused on the cost savings his restructuring had achieved. In his weekly reports to the executive team, he highlighted the 60% reduction in IT personnel costs and the successful transition to offshore support. He wasn't tracking the performance metrics that would have revealed the gradual degradation in system efficiency. By the end of the second week, more significant problems were emerging. The automated underwriting system that evaluated insurance applications was experiencing processing delays. New applications that should have been approved or rejected within 24 hours were sitting in processing queues for days. The underwriting system was perhaps the most complex piece of the infrastructure I had built. It integrated data from multiple external sources, applied sophisticated risk assessment algorithms, and generated detailed reports that human underwriters used to make final approval decisions. The system had to communicate with credit rating agencies, property databases, motor vehicle records, and various other external data providers. These external integrations required secure authentication protocols that I had implemented using my administrative backdoors. Without proper authentication, the external data providers were rejecting Midwest's queries or providing only limited information. The underwriting system was still functioning, but it was operating with incomplete data, which meant that applications required much more manual review. Lisa Thompson in the underwriting department found herself spending hours researching information that the automated system used to provide within minutes. Simple homeowners insurance applications that should have been routine approvals were being flagged for manual review because the system couldn't access the property databases needed to verify coverage details. Rajesh and his team were working around the clock trying to diagnose these issues. They could see that external data connections were failing, but they couldn't understand why. The authentication credentials they had been provided appeared to be correct, but the external providers kept rejecting their connection attempts. What they didn't know was that I had implemented a layered security approach for external integrations. The basic authentication credentials they had access to were real, but they only provided access to limited datasets. Full access to the comprehensive data that the underwriting system required was controlled through my administrative backdoors, which validated the authenticity and authority of each data request. This security approach had been necessary because insurance companies handle extremely sensitive personal and financial information. External data providers required multiple levels of verification before providing complete customer data. I had spent months negotiating these authentication protocols with various providers, establishing Midwest as a trusted partner with appropriate security measures in place. TechFlow was trying to access these external systems using standard protocols, but they lacked the advanced authentication credentials that established Midwest's authority to request comprehensive data. As a result, they were getting basic information but missing the detailed data that made automated underwriting possible. The third week brought even more serious complications. The regulatory compliance reporting system that generated monthly statements for state insurance commissioners experienced a critical failure. The system attempted to compile its regular monthly report, but crashed halfway through the process, leaving Midwest without the documentation required for regulatory compliance. This was exactly the kind of crisis I had designed my systems to prevent. The compliance reporting system was built with multiple redundancy layers and fail-safe procedures, specifically because regulatory violations could result in severe penalties or even license revocation. But those fail-safe procedures required administrative access that only I possessed. Michael Chen in the compliance department called an emergency meeting with David Morrison. "We have a serious problem," he explained. "The monthly regulatory report failed to generate, and we're required to submit it to the state by Friday. If we miss this deadline, we could face significant penalties." David immediately contacted TechFlow for an emergency consultation. Rajesh and two senior technicians worked for 18 straight hours trying to diagnose the compliance system failure. They discovered that the system was trying to access historical data stored in archived databases, but the archive access protocols were failing. What they found was that the archived data was stored using a sophisticated compression and encryption system I had implemented to meet regulatory requirements for long-term data preservation. Accessing this archived data required not just passwords, but cryptographic keys that were tied to my administrative backdoors. Without these keys, the archived data was essentially inaccessible. TechFlow proposed a solution. They could rebuild the monthly report manually by extracting data from current operational systems and manually calculating the historical trend data that was stored in the inaccessible archives. This process would take approximately 40 hours of manual work and would need to be repeated every month until they could reverse engineer the archive access system. David authorized the emergency manual reporting process, which cost Midwest an additional $15,000 in overtime consulting fees from TechFlow. The report was submitted to the state commissioner just hours before the deadline, but it lacked the detailed historical analysis that had made Midwest's compliance reporting exemplary in previous years. More troubling was the realization that this was not a one-time problem. Every month, the compliance system would face the same archive access issues. TechFlow estimated that it would take 3 to 6 months to reverse engineer the archive system and develop alternative access procedures. During that time, Midwest would need to pay for manual report generation each month, at a cost of approximately $12,000 per report. The cost savings David had achieved by eliminating my position were rapidly being eroded by the consulting fees required to maintain basic system functionality. But the financial costs were just the beginning. The real problem was that Midwest's operational efficiency was degrading across multiple departments simultaneously. Customer service response times were increasing as the customer database became less responsive. Claims processing was slowing as the automated routing system lost its intelligence. New business applications were backing up as the underwriting system struggled with incomplete data. Compliance reporting was becoming a monthly crisis that required expensive emergency consulting. Ellen Rodriguez, Midwest's CEO, was beginning to notice patterns in the reports she received from different department heads. Customer satisfaction scores were declining. Processing times were increasing across multiple operational areas. IT consulting costs were skyrocketing beyond anything in the previous budget. But David Morrison continued to focus on his primary metric, personnel cost reduction. In his monthly report to the board of directors, he emphasized that the IT restructuring had achieved its goal of reducing annual salary expenses by over $200,000. He mentioned the implementation challenges as temporary adjustment issues that would be resolved as the offshore team became more familiar with Midwest-specific systems. What David didn't include in his reports was the escalating consulting costs, the declining operational efficiency metrics, or the growing concerns being raised by department heads across the organization. He was measuring success by the costs he had eliminated, not by the problems he had created. Meanwhile, I was settling into a consulting arrangement with a small regional insurance company that needed help upgrading their legacy systems. The work was interesting and challenging, but I couldn't help wondering how long it would take for the problems at Midwest to reach a crisis point. I wasn't hoping for Midwest to fail. The company had been my professional home for 7 years, and I had friends and colleagues there whose livelihoods depended on its success. But I also understood the technical realities of what David had done. Complex systems require sophisticated maintenance, and sophisticated maintenance requires deep knowledge and appropriate access credentials. TechFlow was competent within their areas of expertise, but they were trying to maintain an architectural ecosystem they hadn't designed and couldn't fully understand. The administrative backdoors I had implemented weren't arbitrary barriers to create job security. They were necessary security and efficiency tools that allowed complex systems to function reliably at scale. Every day that passed without proper administrative maintenance was another day of gradual degradation. The problems would continue to multiply and compound until someone made the decision to either rebuild the entire infrastructure from scratch or bring back the person who understood how to maintain it properly. David Morrison had achieved his goal of reducing IT costs, but he had done so by removing the institutional knowledge and administrative access that kept Midwest's digital foundation stable. The consequences of that decision were unfolding gradually but inevitably, and they would ultimately cost far more than my salary ever had. The question wasn't whether Midwest would face a technology crisis. The question was how severe that crisis would become before someone acknowledged that some expertise can't be outsourced and some knowledge can't be easily replaced. David was about to learn that the most expensive cost is often the one you don't plan for, especially when it results from trying to save money by cutting corners on mission-critical infrastructure. The 4th week after my departure marked the beginning of what would later be called the Cascade Period in Midwest Insurance Solutions' internal crisis documentation. Multiple systems that had been showing signs of stress finally reached critical failure points, creating a domino effect that no amount of offshore consulting could resolve. It started with the customer portal on a Tuesday morning. Sandra Williams, a longtime Midwest policyholder, called customer service after being unable to access her account online for 3 consecutive days. When customer service representative Maria Santos tried to reset Sandra's password, she discovered that the portal's authentication system was rejecting all password reset requests. The customer portal wasn't just a simple website. It was an integrated platform that connected to the main customer database, the billing system, the claims tracking system, and the policy management system. When customers logged in, they weren't just accessing a single application. They were viewing real-time data pulled from multiple back-end systems, compiled and presented through a sophisticated interface that made complex insurance information understandable and accessible. I had spent 8 months designing and implementing this portal integration. The challenge wasn't just technical connectivity. Insurance data is governed by strict privacy regulations, and customer access has to be carefully controlled to ensure that people can only view their own information. The portal used a multi-layered authentication system that verified customer identity, validated their authorization to access specific data, and logged every interaction for compliance purposes. The authentication system relied on cryptographic tokens that were generated and validated through my administrative backdoors. These tokens didn't just confirm that a username and password were correct. They established secure sessions that allowed the portal to safely query multiple back-end systems without exposing sensitive data or creating security vulnerabilities. Rajesh Kumar and his TechFlow team had been monitoring the portal's performance metrics for weeks, and everything appeared normal from their perspective. Users were logging in successfully, page load times were acceptable, and the basic functionality was working. What they couldn't see was that the token generation system was gradually failing. Without access to my administrative backdoors, the portal was using cached authentication tokens that had been generated before my departure. These tokens had built-in expiration dates for security purposes. As they expired, the system couldn't generate new ones, which meant that user sessions were becoming increasingly unstable. The first sign of trouble was subtle. Users would log in successfully but find that certain features didn't work properly. They could view their basic policy information, but they couldn't access claims history or billing details. The system was falling back to limited functionality as the more sophisticated integrations failed one by one. Maria Santos in customer service had been fielding increasing numbers of calls from frustrated customers who couldn't access their online accounts properly. She reported the issues to Rajesh, who investigated and found that the portal's error logs were filled with authentication failures. But the error messages were cryptic technical codes that didn't clearly indicate the underlying problem. TechFlow brought in Priya Sharma, a senior security specialist from their Delhi office, to investigate the authentication failures. Priya spent 3 days analyzing the portal's security architecture and quickly realized that she was looking at a much more sophisticated system than standard web authentication. The customer portal used what's called federated authentication, where multiple back-end systems trusted a central authentication authority to verify user credentials. This approach allowed customers to log in once and access data from multiple systems without having to authenticate separately for each service. But it also meant that if the central authentication authority failed, the entire portal would become unusable. Priya discovered that the authentication authority was controlled through administrative protocols that required cryptographic keys she didn't have access to. The existing authentication tokens were valid, but they were temporary by design. As they expired, there was no way to generate new ones without the proper administrative credentials. This was exactly the kind of security design I had implemented to protect Midwest's customer data. Federated authentication is a powerful tool, but it has to be carefully controlled to prevent unauthorized access. The administrative backdoors that controlled token generation weren't arbitrary barriers. They were essential security measures that ensured only authorized personnel could grant access to sensitive customer information. TechFlow proposed a solution that would bypass the existing authentication system entirely. They could rebuild the customer portal using standard web authentication that didn't require the sophisticated token management I had implemented. This approach would restore basic functionality, but it would eliminate many of the advanced features that made Midwest's portal superior to their competitors. More concerning was the timeline. Priya estimated that rebuilding the portal would take 6 to 8 weeks and cost approximately $80,000 in development fees. During that time, Midwest's customers would have limited or no online access to their account information, forcing them to call customer service for routine inquiries that they had previously been able to handle independently. David Morrison authorized the portal rebuild project, but the customer service impact was immediate and severe. Call volumes increased by 300% as customers who couldn't access their online accounts called for basic information like payment due dates and claim status updates. Maria Santos and her team were working overtime to handle the flood of calls, and customer satisfaction scores plummeted as wait times increased. But the customer portal crisis was just the most visible symptom of deeper systemic problems. The real disaster was unfolding in the claims processing department, where the automated fraud detection system had begun generating false positives at an alarming rate. Insurance fraud detection is one of the most complex challenges in the industry. Legitimate claims can sometimes look suspicious, while sophisticated fraud can appear perfectly normal. The system I had built for Midwest used machine learning algorithms that analyzed patterns across thousands of variables to identify claims that warranted additional investigation. The fraud detection system didn't just look at individual claims in isolation. It analyzed patterns across multiple claims, identified relationships between different policyholders, and detected anomalies that might indicate coordinated fraud schemes. This analysis required access to comprehensive historical data and the ability to perform complex queries across multiple databases. The machine learning algorithms that powered fraud detection required periodic retraining to maintain their accuracy. New fraud schemes emerge constantly, and legitimate claim patterns change over time. The system had to adapt continuously to remain effective. This retraining process required access to massive datasets and sophisticated computational resources that were controlled through my administrative backdoors. Without proper retraining, the fraud detection algorithms were becoming increasingly unreliable. They were flagging legitimate claims as suspicious while missing actual fraud indicators. Claims adjuster Robert Kim noticed that his review queue was filled with routine claims that the system had flagged for manual investigation, while obviously suspicious claims were being processed automatically. The impact on claims processing efficiency was devastating. Claims that should have been approved automatically were being held for manual review, creating backlogs throughout the department. Meanwhile, actual fraudulent claims were slipping through automated processing, potentially costing Midwest thousands of dollars in illegitimate payouts. Lisa Chen, the claims department manager, called an emergency meeting with David Morrison to discuss the fraud detection crisis. "The system is completely unreliable," she explained. "We're manually reviewing claims that are obviously legitimate, while potentially fraudulent claims are being approved without human oversight. This is exactly the opposite of what should be happening." David immediately contacted TechFlow for another emergency consultation. Rajesh brought in Dr. Amit Patel, a machine learning specialist, to analyze the fraud detection system. Dr. Patel quickly identified the core problem. The algorithms hadn't been retrained in over a month, which meant they were using outdated pattern recognition models. But retraining the algorithms required access to historical claims data that was stored in the same encrypted archives that had caused problems with the compliance reporting system. Dr. Patel could access recent claims data, but he couldn't get the comprehensive historical dataset needed to retrain the machine learning models effectively. TechFlow proposed a temporary solution. They could manually adjust the fraud detection thresholds to reduce false positives, but this would also reduce the system's ability to detect actual fraud. Alternatively, they could disable automated fraud detection entirely and require manual review of all claims, but this would create enormous backlogs and dramatically increase processing costs. David chose the threshold adjustment approach, hoping to buy time while TechFlow worked on a more permanent solution. But adjusting the thresholds was like trying to tune a sophisticated instrument with a hammer. The fraud detection system had been calibrated based on years of historical data and careful analysis of Midwest-specific customer base and risk profile. Crude threshold adjustments couldn't replicate that sophisticated calibration. The adjusted system reduced false positives slightly, but it also missed several legitimate fraud indicators that the original algorithms would have caught. Within 2 weeks, Midwest had paid out over $40,000 in claims that should have been flagged for investigation. More troubling was the realization that they had no way of knowing how much fraud was slipping through undetected. Meanwhile, the underwriting department was facing its own crisis as the automated risk assessment system began producing inconsistent results. New insurance applications that should have been straightforward approvals were being rejected, while high-risk applications were being approved at inappropriate premium rates. The underwriting system was perhaps the most financially critical component of Midwest's infrastructure. Accurate risk assessment directly impacts profitability. Approve too many high-risk policies, and claims costs exceed premium revenue. Reject too many low-risk applications, and competitors capture market share. The system had to strike a precise balance based on sophisticated analysis of risk factors and market conditions. I had spent 2 years developing and refining the risk assessment algorithms, incorporating data from dozens of external sources, and calibrating the models based on Midwest's historical loss experience. The system analyzed everything from credit scores and property values to weather patterns and local crime statistics to generate accurate risk profiles for each applicant. But the risk assessment algorithms depended on real-time data feeds from external providers, and those data feeds required the same kind of sophisticated authentication that was controlled through my administrative backdoors. Without proper authentication, the external providers were limiting Midwest's access to basic data sets that provided incomplete risk assessment information. Underwriter Jennifer Walsh was seeing applications that the system had approved at standard rates despite obvious risk factors. A homeowner's insurance application for a property in a high-crime area with a history of break-ins had been approved at the same rate as a similar property in a safe neighborhood. The system couldn't access the crime statistics data needed to properly assess the risk differential. Conversely, the system was rejecting applications from obviously low-risk customers because it couldn't access the comprehensive data needed to verify their low-risk status. A customer with excellent credit, no claims history, and a property in a safe area was being rejected because the system couldn't confirm these positive risk factors. TechFlow brought in additional specialists to address the underwriting crisis, but they faced the same fundamental problem that was affecting every other system. The external data integrations that made sophisticated analysis possible were controlled through administrative credentials they didn't possess. The specialists could access basic data feeds, but they couldn't get the comprehensive information that allowed accurate risk assessment. They proposed rebuilding the underwriting system, using simpler risk models that relied only on data sources they could access reliably. But these simplified models would make Midwest's underwriting significantly less competitive and potentially less profitable. By the end of the 5th week, David Morrison was facing a crisis that extended far beyond IT system performance. Customer satisfaction scores were at historic lows due to portal access problems and increased customer service wait times. Claims processing efficiency had declined by over 40% due to fraud detection system failures. New business applications were backing up in underwriting as the risk assessment system produced unreliable results. The financial impact was becoming impossible to ignore. TechFlow consulting fees had already exceeded $100,000, with no resolution in sight for the fundamental authentication and data access problems. Customer service overtime costs were mounting as call volumes remained elevated. The fraud detection failures had resulted in tens of thousands of dollars in questionable claim payouts. Most troubling was the realization that these weren't temporary adjustment issues that would resolve as TechFlow became more familiar with Midwest's systems. These were fundamental architectural problems that resulted from removing the administrative access and institutional knowledge required to maintain complex, integrated infrastructure. Ellen Rodriguez, Midwest's CEO, was receiving increasingly urgent reports from department heads across the organization. Customer service was overwhelmed. Claims processing was inefficient and potentially costly. Underwriting was producing inconsistent results that could impact long-term profitability. IT consulting costs were spiraling out of control. But David Morrison continued to frame these issues as temporary implementation challenges. In his weekly reports, he emphasized that the offshore transition was still generating significant cost savings compared to my previous salary. He acknowledged the consulting costs as one-time investment in system optimization and projected that expenses would normalize once TechFlow completed their analysis and optimization work. What David didn't acknowledge was that TechFlow couldn't complete their optimization work without access to the administrative tools and institutional knowledge that had walked out the door with me. They could implement workarounds and temporary solutions, but they couldn't restore the sophisticated functionality that had made Midwest systems competitive and efficient. Dr. Patel from TechFlow's machine learning team was brutally honest in his technical assessment. The fraud detection system was built using advanced techniques and comprehensive data sources. We can rebuild it using simpler methods, but it will be significantly less effective. The sophisticated functionality requires access to systems and data that we cannot replicate with our current resources. Priya Sharma provided a similar assessment of the customer portal situation. The existing authentication architecture is extremely sophisticated and secure, but it requires administrative credentials that we don't have access to. We can build a replacement system, but it will lack many of the advanced features that customers have come to expect. The pattern was consistent across every system TechFlow analyzed. They could provide basic functionality using standard approaches, but they couldn't replicate these sophisticated, integrated capabilities that had made Midwest's infrastructure superior to their competitors. The choice was becoming clear: accept significantly reduced functionality at a much higher cost than anticipated, or find a way to restore access to the administrative tools and knowledge that made the original systems work properly. David Morrison was beginning to realize that his cost-cutting initiative had created problems that couldn't be solved simply by bringing in more offshore consultants. The systems I had built weren't just collections of standard software applications. They were custom-designed, tightly integrated solutions that required specialized knowledge and administrative access to maintain properly. TechFlow was competent within their areas of expertise, but they were essentially trying to reverse engineer and rebuild 7 years of custom development work without access to the documentation, tools, or institutional knowledge that had created those systems originally. It was like trying to repair a complex machine without the blueprints, tools, or understanding of how the original designer had intended it to function. The consulting costs were mounting, the system performance was declining, and the fundamental problems were becoming more apparent with each passing week. David had achieved his goal of reducing personnel costs, but he was discovering that some savings come with hidden expenses that far exceed the original investment. Midwest Insurance Solutions was facing a technology crisis that threatened their operational efficiency, customer satisfaction, and competitive position. The question was no longer whether they needed to address the fundamental authentication and access problems. The question was how much damage they would sustain before acknowledging that some expertise cannot be easily replaced, and some systems require the original architect to function properly. The crisis reached its breaking point on a Wednesday morning in the 6th week, when Midwest Insurance Solutions experienced what could only be described as a complete operational meltdown. The automated billing system, which had been limping along with reduced functionality, finally collapsed entirely when it attempted to process the month-end premium collection cycle for over 15,000 active policies. The billing system wasn't just a simple payment processor. It was an intricate orchestration of multiple financial processes that had to coordinate perfectly to maintain Midwest's cash flow and regulatory compliance. Premium calculations had to account for policy modifications, coverage changes, multi-policy discounts, and payment plan adjustments. The system had to interface with banking networks, credit card processors, and automated clearinghouse systems to collect payments efficiently and securely. I had designed the billing system to handle these complex requirements through a series of interconnected processes that ran in carefully timed sequences. The month-end cycle was the most demanding operation, requiring the system to reconcile thousands of accounts, generate accurate statements, process automatic payments, and update customer records across multiple databases simultaneously. This massive monthly operation required extensive computational resources and database access that was coordinated through my administrative backdoors. The system had to temporarily lock certain databases to prevent conflicts, coordinate between different servers to maintain data consistency, and verify the integrity of financial transactions through cryptographic validation processes. Without access to my administrative protocols, the billing system couldn't coordinate these complex operations properly. When it attempted to run the month-end cycle, it encountered authentication failures at multiple points in the process. Some premium calculations completed while others failed. Payment processing began for some customers but not others. Database updates occurred partially, leaving customer accounts in inconsistent states. The result was chaos. Thousands of customers received incorrect billing statements. Some were charged double premiums while others weren't charged at all. Payment processing failures meant that customers who had attempted to pay their premiums were told their payments had been rejected, even though the money had been withdrawn from their accounts. The accounting department couldn't reconcile the financial records because the automated systems had generated contradictory transaction logs. Rebecca Martinez in the billing department arrived at work Wednesday morning to find her phone already ringing with angry customers demanding explanations for billing errors. Within 2 hours, she had received over 60 calls from customers reporting problems ranging from duplicate charges to missing payments, to accounts that showed conflicting balance information. The customer service department was overwhelmed before 9 a.m. Maria Santos and her team were fielding hundreds of calls from confused and frustrated customers who couldn't understand their billing statements. But the customer service representatives couldn't provide accurate information because the customer database was showing inconsistent data due to the partial system failures. David Morrison was called into an emergency meeting with Ellen Rodriguez and the executive team before 10 a.m. The scope of the billing crisis was unprecedented in Midwest's history. Thousands of customer accounts were affected. The financial reconciliation process that should have taken hours was now estimated to require weeks of manual correction work. Ellen's first question was direct and pointed. How did this happen, and how do we fix it immediately? David explained that TechFlow was investigating a billing system malfunction and working to restore normal functionality. He estimated that the immediate crisis could be resolved within 24 to 48 hours, with full system restoration following within a week. But Rajesh Kumar's emergency assessment painted a much more dire picture. The billing system hadn't just malfunctioned. It had experienced cascading failures across multiple integrated components. Some of these failures had corrupted data in ways that couldn't be easily reversed. The month-end processing cycle would need to be completely rerun, but that couldn't happen until the underlying authentication and coordination problems were resolved. TechFlow brought in their most senior database recovery specialist, Dr. Kavita Singh, to assess the data integrity situation. Her preliminary analysis revealed that the partial processing failures had created inconsistencies across multiple customer accounts. Some customers' payment history showed transactions that hadn't actually been processed. Others showed missing payments that had actually been collected successfully. More concerning was the discovery that the financial reconciliation databases contained conflicting information that would require extensive manual auditing to correct. The automated systems that normally ensured consistency between different financial records had failed during the month-end processing, leaving Midwest with financial records that couldn't be trusted without comprehensive verification. Dr. Singh estimated that fully restoring data integrity would require 3 to 4 weeks of intensive database recovery work, followed by manual reconciliation of thousands of customer accounts. The cost for this emergency data recovery project would exceed $200,000, and there was no guarantee that all corrupted information could be fully recovered. The regulatory implications were severe. Insurance companies are required to maintain accurate financial records and provide detailed reporting to state regulators. The billing system failures had compromised Midwest's ability to demonstrate compliance with financial oversight requirements. The state insurance commissioner's office would need to be notified of the data integrity issues, and Midwest would face potential fines and increased regulatory scrutiny. Ellen Rodriguez made the decision that David Morrison had been hoping to avoid. "I want Jessica Chen contacted immediately," she told the executive team. "We need to understand what happened and what it will take to prevent this from happening again." The call came to my personal phone Thursday morning. It wasn't David Morrison. It was Ellen Rodriguez herself, and I could hear the stress in her voice from the first word. "Jessica, I hope you're willing to talk with us," Ellen said. "We're experiencing significant system issues, and we believe your expertise could help us understand what's happening and how to resolve it." I listened as Ellen described the billing crisis, the customer service impact, and the preliminary assessments from TechFlow's recovery specialists. She was careful not to assign blame, but she was clearly desperate for solutions to problems that were threatening Midwest's operational stability. "I'd be willing to consult on the situation," I told her. "But I'd need to understand the full scope of what's happening and have complete access to assess the systems properly." Ellen arranged for me to meet with the executive team Friday morning. The meeting was held in the large conference room on the executive floor, the same room where David had terminated my employment 6 weeks earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different now. Ellen was accompanied by Chief Financial Officer Robert Kim, Legal Counsel Amanda Foster, and notably, David Morrison was not present. Ellen explained that David was managing the ongoing operational response while they discussed long-term solutions with me. The situation was worse than Ellen had initially described. The billing crisis was just the most visible symptom of systematic degradation that was affecting every aspect of Midwest's operations. Customer satisfaction scores had dropped to the lowest levels in company history. Processing times for claims, underwriting, and customer service had increased dramatically. IT consulting costs had exceeded $300,000 with no resolution in sight. More critically, Midwest was facing potential regulatory action due to compliance reporting failures and data integrity issues. The State Insurance Commissioner's office had scheduled a formal audit for the following month, and Midwest couldn't demonstrate compliance with financial oversight requirements until the billing system problems were resolved. "We need to discuss bringing you back," Ellen said directly. "Not as an employee, but as an independent contractor with whatever authority and resources you need to stabilize these systems and restore normal operations." I had prepared for this conversation during the drive downtown. "I'm willing to help," I said, "but we need to be clear about what that involves and what it will take to prevent these problems from recurring." I explained that the system failures weren't random malfunctions. They were the inevitable result of removing the administrative access and institutional knowledge required to maintain complex, integrated infrastructure. TechFlow was competent within their areas of expertise, but they couldn't replicate the specialized tools and deep understanding needed to keep my custom-built systems functioning properly. "The immediate priority is data recovery and system stabilization," I continued. "But the long-term solution requires either rebuilding everything from scratch using standard approaches or restoring the architectural framework I originally designed with proper documentation and redundancy." Robert Kim asked about the timeline for immediate stabilization. I explained that I could restore basic functionality within 48 hours if I had full system access and administrative authority. Complete data recovery would take approximately 2 weeks. But establishing a sustainable long-term solution would require a more comprehensive approach. Amanda Foster asked about the legal and regulatory implications. I outlined the compliance issues that needed immediate attention and the documentation requirements for satisfying regulatory oversight. The state audit could be managed successfully, but only if the underlying data integrity problems were resolved quickly. Ellen asked the crucial question, "What would it take for you to take on this project?" I presented my requirements clearly and completely. I would return as Director of Technology Infrastructure, not just as a consultant. I would have complete authority over all technology decisions and vendor relationships. The TechFlow contract would be terminated immediately, with transition responsibilities handled internally. I would receive equity compensation tied to operational performance metrics rather than just salary. Most importantly, David Morrison's role would need to be restructured to eliminate his authority over technology decisions. The crisis had demonstrated that technology infrastructure couldn't be managed by someone who didn't understand the technical complexities involved. Ellen read through my proposal carefully. Amanda whispered legal considerations in her ear. Robert reviewed the financial implications. Then Ellen looked up and said, "These terms are acceptable. When can you start?" I started Monday morning, walking into the same building I had left 6 weeks earlier, but with dramatically different authority and responsibility. My first priority was assessing the full scope of the system damage and developing a recovery plan that would restore operations as quickly as possible. The billing system required immediate emergency intervention. I spent the first day analyzing the corrupted data and identifying which records could be recovered automatically and which would require manual correction. Using my administrative backdoors, I was able to restore the authentication protocols that allowed proper coordination between different system components. The data recovery process was complex, but systematic. I rebuilt the month-end processing cycle using backup data from before the failure, then carefully reprocessed each customer account to ensure accuracy. The cryptographic validation systems that had failed during TechFlow's management were restored to full functionality, allowing automated verification of financial transactions. Within 72 hours, the billing system was generating accurate statements and processing payments normally. Customer service call volumes dropped dramatically as billing inquiries returned to normal levels. The accounting department was able to complete their monthly reconciliation processes without the massive manual corrections that had been anticipated. But restoring immediate functionality was just the beginning. The real challenge was implementing a sustainable technology management approach that would prevent similar crises from occurring in the future. I couldn't just rebuild my old systems and hope that the next cost-cutting initiative wouldn't create the same problems again. I designed a new technology governance framework that balanced efficiency with redundancy. Critical administrative functions were documented completely and distributed among multiple team members. The sophisticated automation and integration capabilities that made Midwest competitive were preserved, but they were implemented with proper backup procedures and cross-training protocols. The customer portal was rebuilt using the same federated authentication architecture that had made it secure and efficient, but the administrative access was structured so that multiple qualified team members could maintain the token generation systems. The fraud detection algorithms were retrained and optimized, but the machine learning processes were documented so that they could be maintained by qualified specialists, even if I wasn't available. Most importantly, I established technology decision-making processes that required both technical and business input for major changes. No single executive could unilaterally decide to outsource or restructure mission-critical infrastructure without comprehensive technical assessment and approval from multiple stakeholders. The regulatory audit proceeded smoothly 3 weeks after my return. The State Insurance Commissioner's Office found that Midwest had restored compliance with all financial oversight requirements and had implemented improved controls for technology governance. Rather than facing penalties, Midwest was commended for their proactive response to the crisis and their enhanced operational procedures. Customer satisfaction scores returned to historic highs as system performance improved beyond even pre-crisis levels. The new documentation and cross-training protocols actually made operations more efficient than they had been originally. Claims processing times improved, underwriting accuracy increased, and customer service response times decreased to industry-leading levels. 6 months after my return, Midwest's technology infrastructure was more robust and capable than ever before. We had implemented advanced security measures, enhanced automation capabilities, and comprehensive redundancy procedures. The company had not only recovered from the crisis, but had emerged stronger and more competitive. The financial impact of the crisis served as a powerful lesson for the entire organization. The 6 weeks of system degradation and emergency consulting had cost Midwest over $800,000 in direct expenses, lost productivity, and recovery efforts. David Morrison's attempt to save money by eliminating my position had ultimately cost the company 4 times my annual salary. More significantly, the near miss with regulatory sanctions and the customer satisfaction crisis had demonstrated the strategic importance of technology infrastructure. Ellen Rodriguez established technology as a core competency rather than a support function, ensuring that future decisions would be made with full understanding of technical complexities and dependencies. David Morrison was reassigned to focus on non-technical operational improvements, a role that better matched his MBA background and consulting experience. His cost-cutting initiative had failed catastrophically, but the lessons learned helped Midwest develop more sophisticated approaches to operational efficiency that didn't compromise mission-critical capabilities. The TechFlow contract termination provided another educational opportunity. While offshore consulting can be valuable for routine support and standard development projects, it cannot replace deep institutional knowledge and specialized expertise for complex mission-critical systems. Midwest developed hybrid approaches that used offshore resources appropriately while maintaining internal control over core infrastructure. A year after the crisis, Midwest Insurance Solutions had achieved record profitability and market growth. The technology infrastructure that had nearly collapsed under David's cost-cutting initiative had become a competitive advantage that enabled expansion into new markets and product lines. Customer retention rates improved as system reliability and user experience exceeded industry standards. The incident became a case study that was shared throughout the insurance industry as an example of both the risks of mismanaging technology infrastructure and the benefits of investing properly in technical expertise. Several competitor companies reached out to understand how Midwest had achieved such dramatic improvements in operational efficiency and customer satisfaction. For me personally, the experience reinforced the importance of building systems with proper documentation and redundancy. But it also demonstrated the value of deep technical expertise in an increasingly digital business environment. The equity compensation tied to operational performance proved highly lucrative, as Midwest's efficiency improvements translated directly into profitability gains. The lesson for other technical professionals was clear. Expertise that appears invisible to management is often the foundation that makes everything else possible. Systems that seem simple from the outside often depend on sophisticated architecture and specialized knowledge that cannot be easily replicated or replaced. When organizations attempt to cut costs by eliminating technical expertise, they often discover that some savings come with hidden expenses that far exceed the original investment. The broader business lesson was equally important. Technology infrastructure is not a commodity that can be outsourced arbitrarily. Complex systems require deep understanding, specialized access, and institutional knowledge that develops over years of hands-on experience. Attempts to reduce costs by replacing expertise with cheaper alternatives often result in reduced capability, increased risk, and ultimately higher expenses. Midwest's recovery demonstrated that organizations can learn from technology crises and emerge stronger than before. But the key is recognizing that technology is a strategic asset that requires appropriate investment and governance, not just a cost center that should be minimized whenever possible. Standing in my new corner office 18 months after what colleagues now quietly refer to as the infrastructure crisis, I can see the entire downtown Chicago skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that catch the afternoon light perfectly. The view is symbolic in ways that David Morrison could never have imagined when he handed me that termination letter in this very same building. What he thought was an ending turned out to be the beginning of something far more substantial and rewarding than either of us had anticipated. The transformation of Midwest Insurance Solutions into an industry leader in operational efficiency and customer satisfaction didn't happen overnight, but it happened with a momentum that surprised even me. The crisis that David's cost-cutting initiative had precipitated became the catalyst for changes that positioned Midwest as one of the most technologically advanced and profitable regional insurance companies in the Midwest. My role as Director of Technology Infrastructure evolved naturally into something much more comprehensive. Ellen Rodriguez recognized that the near-catastrophic system failures had revealed fundamental gaps in how technology decisions were made at the executive level. She asked me to establish a technology governance committee that would ensure future infrastructure decisions were made with proper technical assessment and long-term strategic thinking. The committee brought together representatives from every department to ensure that technology initiatives aligned with actual business needs rather than abstract cost-cutting targets. When the marketing department wanted to implement a new customer communication platform, the committee evaluated not just the financial costs but the integration requirements, security implications, and maintenance overhead. When the claims department proposed automating additional processes, we assessed the training requirements, performance impacts, and regulatory compliance considerations. This collaborative approach to technology governance created something unprecedented at Midwest: genuine alignment between business objectives and technical capabilities. Instead of technology being imposed from above by executives who didn't understand the complexities involved, or being developed in isolation by technical teams who didn't fully understand business requirements, every major initiative was designed through collaborative planning that considered all stakeholder perspectives. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Customer satisfaction scores didn't just recover from the crisis period. They reached levels that positioned Midwest in the top 10% of regional insurance providers nationally. Processing times for routine transactions improved beyond pre-crisis levels, as the new documentation and training procedures eliminated inefficiencies that had existed in the original systems. More significantly, the enhanced system reliability and performance capabilities enabled Midwest to expand into market segments that had previously been inaccessible. The sophisticated risk assessment algorithms that I rebuilt with improved data integration allowed the company to underwrite complex commercial policies that smaller regional insurers typically couldn't handle profitably. The automated fraud detection systems that emerged from the crisis period were more accurate and efficient than anything Midwest had operated previously. The financial transformation was remarkable. Within 12 months of my return, Midwest's operational efficiency improvements had generated cost savings that exceeded the total crisis recovery expenses. The enhanced underwriting capabilities enabled premium growth in profitable market segments. The improved customer retention rates reduced acquisition costs significantly. The company's profitability increased by 37% year over year, the largest single-year improvement in company history. Ellen Rodriguez was quick to acknowledge the connection between technology infrastructure and business performance. In her annual presentation to the board of directors, she explicitly credited the technology governance framework and infrastructure investments with enabling Midwest's exceptional performance. Our competitive advantage is no longer just about insurance expertise, she explained. It's about our ability to deliver that expertise through technological capabilities that our competitors can't match. The board's response was to authorize additional technology investments that further enhanced Midwest's competitive position. We implemented advanced analytics platforms that provided deeper insights into customer behavior and risk patterns. We developed mobile applications that set new standards for user experience in the insurance industry. We established data integration capabilities that allowed real-time coordination with external partners and service providers. Each of these initiatives was planned and executed using the governance framework that emerged from the crisis experience. Technical complexity was evaluated thoroughly before commitments were made. Implementation timelines included comprehensive testing and training phases. Documentation and maintenance procedures were established before systems went into production. The approach was more deliberate and careful than the rapid deployment methods I had used in my earlier years at Midwest, but it was also more sustainable and reliable. The personal vindication was deeply satisfying, but the professional growth was even more rewarding. Building systems under crisis pressure had taught me valuable lessons about resilience and redundancy that I applied to every new project. The experience of watching sophisticated infrastructure fail due to inadequate maintenance had reinforced the importance of documentation, training, and knowledge transfer. Most importantly, the collaborative governance approach had shown me how technical expertise could be leveraged more effectively when it was integrated with business strategy rather than operating in isolation. My compensation structure reflected this expanded role and demonstrated results. The equity stake that Ellen had approved as part of my return package proved highly lucrative, as Midwest's valuation increased substantially. The performance bonuses tied to operational efficiency metrics provided additional rewards that far exceeded my previous salary. More satisfying than the financial benefits was the recognition that technology leadership was now considered essential to Midwest's strategic planning and competitive positioning. The industry recognition that followed was unexpected but gratifying. Insurance trade publications featured case studies of Midwest's technology-driven performance improvements. I was invited to speak at conferences about governance frameworks for technology infrastructure in regulated industries. Other regional insurance companies requested consulting engagements to help them avoid the pitfalls that had created Midwest's crisis and implement similar efficiency improvements. These speaking and consulting opportunities provided additional revenue streams, but also served a larger purpose. The lessons learned from Midwest's near miss with operational catastrophe could help other organizations avoid similar crises. The governance frameworks and implementation methodologies that we had developed could be adapted to different industries and organizational structures. The collaborative approaches to technology decision-making could benefit any company where technical complexity intersected with business objectives. David Morrison's career trajectory provided an interesting counterpoint to these developments. His reassignment to non-technical operational improvements was initially viewed as a face-saving gesture, but it actually proved beneficial for both David and Midwest. His MBA background and consulting experience were well suited to areas like process optimization, vendor management, and performance measurement that didn't require deep technical expertise. Over time, David developed a much better understanding of the relationship between technology infrastructure and business performance. He became an advocate for the collaborative governance approach and contributed valuable business perspective to technology planning discussions. His experience with the outsourcing crisis had taught him to respect technical complexity and seek expert advice before making decisions that could impact mission-critical systems. The relationship between David and myself evolved from adversarial to professional to genuinely collaborative. We worked together on several initiatives that required both business strategy and technical implementation. His understanding of cost-benefit analysis and project management complemented my technical architecture and system design expertise. The combination proved effective for complex projects that required both business and technical success criteria. This professional reconciliation illustrated an important lesson about organizational learning and growth. The crisis that had nearly destroyed Midwest's operational capabilities had also created opportunities for individuals to develop new skills, gain deeper understanding, and contribute more effectively to organizational success. David's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from the experience demonstrated the kind of intellectual humility that enables both personal and organizational growth. TechFlow's contract termination had been handled professionally and provided additional learning opportunities for Midwest's technology governance framework. Rather than simply cutting ties and moving on, we conducted a thorough post-mortem analysis of what had worked well, what had failed, and why the offshore arrangement had been inadequate for Midwest's specific requirements. The analysis revealed that TechFlow's team had been competent and well-intentioned, but they had been set up for failure by unrealistic expectations and inadequate preparation. They had been asked to maintain systems they hadn't designed, using tools they didn't have access to, with documentation that was incomplete for their specific needs. The failure wasn't due to technical incompetence, but rather to fundamental misunderstanding of the knowledge transfer and access requirements for maintaining complex, custom-built infrastructure. This understanding led to more sophisticated approaches to vendor management and outsourcing decisions. When Midwest did engage external technical resources, we ensured that the scope of work was clearly defined, that the external team had appropriate access to necessary tools and documentation, and that internal knowledge transfer was comprehensive and verifiable. Offshore resources proved valuable for specific projects with well-defined requirements, but we maintained internal control over core infrastructure and mission-critical systems. The lessons learned from the TechFlow experience also influenced how we approached internal knowledge management and succession planning. Every critical system now had multiple internal staff members who understood its operation and maintenance requirements. Documentation standards were enhanced to ensure that specialized knowledge could be transferred effectively when personnel changes occurred. Cross-training programs ensured that individual expertise was shared across team members rather than concentrated in single points of failure. These organizational resilience measures proved their value when 2 senior team members left Midwest for opportunities at larger companies over the following year. Instead of creating knowledge gaps or operational risks, their departures were managed smoothly through established transition procedures and documentation standards. The systems they had been responsible for continued operating normally, and their replacements were able to assume full responsibility with minimal disruption. The customer impact of Midwest's technology transformation extended far beyond improved system performance and reliability. The enhanced capabilities enabled new service offerings that differentiated Midwest from competitors and created additional revenue opportunities. Real-time claims processing allowed customers to receive settlement payments within hours rather than days for routine claims. Advanced risk assessment capabilities enabled customized coverage options that provided better protection at lower costs for qualified customers. The mobile applications that we developed provided customers with unprecedented access to their policy information, claims status, and account management tools. Industry surveys consistently ranked Midwest's digital customer experience among the best in the regional insurance market. Customer retention rates improved significantly as policyholders chose to stay with Midwest, rather than switching to competitors who offered lower prices but inferior service capabilities. These customer satisfaction improvements translated directly into business growth and profitability. Word-of-mouth referrals increased substantially as satisfied customers recommended Midwest to friends and family members. The company's reputation for reliable service and technological sophistication attracted high-value customers who prioritized service quality over price considerations. Premium growth in profitable market segments more than compensated for any price-sensitive customers who chose competitors based solely on cost considerations. The regulatory relationships that had been strained during the crisis period were transformed into partnerships that benefited both Midwest and the insurance oversight agencies. The enhanced documentation and reporting capabilities that emerged from the technology improvements made compliance demonstrations more comprehensive and efficient. State regulators praised Midwest's proactive approach to system governance and used our frameworks as examples for other companies seeking to improve their technology management practices. This positive regulatory relationship created additional competitive advantages. When new regulations were proposed that required enhanced data reporting or system capabilities, Midwest was often able to achieve compliance more quickly and cost-effectively than competitors who lacked sophisticated technology infrastructure. Early compliance with new requirements sometimes provided market opportunities before competitors could adapt their systems accordingly. The professional development opportunities that emerged from Midwest's technology leadership position proved valuable for the entire technical team. Team members were invited to present at industry conferences, participate in regulatory working groups, and contribute to best practice publications. These external engagements enhanced their professional credentials, while also building Midwest's reputation as a technology leader in the insurance industry. Several team members leveraged their experience at Midwest to advance to senior technical roles at larger companies or to launch successful consulting practices serving the insurance industry. Rather than viewing these departures as losses, we celebrated them as evidence of the high-quality professional development that Midwest provided. The reputation for developing exceptional technical talent made it easier to recruit qualified candidates when positions became available. My own professional development accelerated significantly during this period. The combination of technical leadership, business strategy involvement, and industry recognition created opportunities that wouldn't have been available in a traditional technical role. Board memberships, advisory positions, and consulting engagements provided exposure to diverse challenges and perspectives that enhanced my understanding of how technology leadership could drive organizational success across different industries. The speaking engagements and conference presentations that resulted from Midwest's transformation story reached audiences far beyond the insurance industry. Technology professionals in healthcare, financial services, manufacturing, and other regulated industries faced similar challenges in balancing operational efficiency with system reliability and security. The governance frameworks and collaborative approaches that we had developed proved applicable to organizations dealing with complex technology decisions in mission-critical environments. The financial returns from these external activities were substantial, but the intellectual satisfaction was even more rewarding. Contributing to the professional development of technology leaders in other organizations felt like a natural extension of the mentoring and knowledge transfer work that I had always enjoyed. The opportunity to help other companies avoid the pitfalls that had created Midwest's crisis provided a sense of purpose that went beyond individual career advancement. Looking back on the entire experience, from the initial termination through the crisis period to the eventual transformation and industry recognition, the pattern that emerges is one of hidden value becoming visible through adversity. David Morrison's cost-cutting initiative had been based on the assumption that technical expertise was a commodity that could be replaced with cheaper alternatives. The crisis that followed demonstrated that sophisticated technical knowledge is actually a strategic asset that creates competitive advantages and enables business capabilities that cannot be easily replicated. The lesson extends beyond technology management to broader questions about how organizations identify and protect their sources of competitive advantage. Expertise that appears invisible during normal operations often proves essential during periods of stress or change. Knowledge that seems easily transferable may actually depend on experience, intuition, and institutional understanding that cannot be documented comprehensively or replicated quickly. For individual professionals, the experience reinforced the importance of developing capabilities that are genuinely valuable and difficult to replace. Technical skills alone are insufficient if they can be performed equally well by less expensive alternatives. But technical skills combined with business understanding, institutional knowledge, and collaborative leadership create value propositions that are much more difficult to replicate or outsource. The strategic approach to career development that emerged from this experience emphasizes building expertise that is both deep and broad, technical and collaborative, specialized and adaptable. The goal is not just to be irreplaceable, but to be so valuable that organizations recognize the strategic importance of investing in and retaining such capabilities, rather than treating them as costs to be minimized. The organizational lessons are equally important for executives and business leaders. Technology infrastructure is not a support function that can be optimized independently of business strategy. In today's competitive environment, technological capabilities often determine an organization's ability to serve customers effectively, operate efficiently, and adapt to changing market conditions. Decisions about technology investments and personnel should be made with full understanding of their strategic implications, rather than focusing solely on cost considerations. The collaborative governance approach that emerged from Midwest crisis provides a model for how organizations can make better technology decisions by bringing together business and technical perspectives in structured, systematic ways. Rather than having business leaders make technology decisions without technical understanding or having technical teams work in isolation from business requirements, successful organizations create frameworks for collaborative decision-making that leverage both types of expertise effectively. Today, as I review the quarterly performance reports that consistently show Midwest exceeding industry benchmarks for customer satisfaction, operational efficiency, and profitability, I'm struck by how much stronger the organization became through the process of nearly failing completely. The crisis that David Morrison's cost-cutting initiative precipitated could have destroyed Midwest's competitive position permanently. Instead, it became the catalyst for transformation that created capabilities and advantages that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The technology infrastructure that exists today is more sophisticated, reliable, and strategically valuable than what existed before the crisis. The organizational knowledge and governance capabilities that were developed during the recovery period continue to enable better decision-making and faster adaptation to changing requirements. The collaborative culture that emerged from working together to solve complex problems has improved performance across all aspects of Midwest's operations. For me personally, the experience transformed both my career trajectory and my understanding of how technical expertise can create strategic value for organizations. The crisis that initially felt like a professional setback became the foundation for achievements that exceeded anything I had imagined when I was simply maintaining systems and solving routine technical problems. The financial rewards have been substantial, but the professional satisfaction has been even more meaningful. Building technology capabilities that enable business success, developing frameworks that help organizations make better decisions, and mentoring other technical professionals who are creating value in their own organizations provides a sense of purpose and impact that goes far beyond individual career advancement. The industry recognition and external opportunities that resulted from Midwest transformation continue to provide interesting challenges and learning experiences. But the foundation remains the collaborative technology leadership approach that we developed together during the crisis period. Technical expertise combined with business understanding, institutional knowledge, and genuine partnership with non-technical colleagues creates value that benefits everyone involved. David Morrison learned valuable lessons about the complexity of technology decisions and the importance of seeking expert advice before making changes that could impact mission-critical systems. Ellen Rodriguez gained a deeper appreciation for the strategic importance of technology infrastructure and the value of investing in capabilities that create competitive advantages. The entire Midwest organization developed better approaches to collaborative decision-making and knowledge management that continue to improve performance across all operational areas. The broader lesson for anyone dealing with similar challenges is that expertise and institutional knowledge are often more valuable than they appear during normal operations. Organizations that recognize and invest in such capabilities create competitive advantages that are difficult for competitors to replicate. Individuals who develop such capabilities and learn to apply them collaboratively create value propositions that make them strategic assets rather than replaceable resources. The experience also demonstrated that setbacks and crises can become opportunities for growth and transformation if they are approached with the right mindset and strategies. Rather than viewing David's termination decision as a personal failure or seeking revenge for the injustice, I focused on understanding the underlying problems and developing solutions that would benefit everyone involved. This collaborative approach to problem-solving created outcomes that were better for Midwest, better for me personally, and better for everyone who learned from the experience. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering that spoke of prestige and celebration. Midwest Insurance Solutions cordially invites you to our annual Excellence Awards dinner, recognizing outstanding achievements in operational innovation and customer service excellence. What made this invitation particularly meaningful wasn't just the formal recognition it represented, but the handwritten note from Ellen Rodriguez at the bottom. "Jessica, your vision transformed our entire industry approach." We couldn't have imagined these results 2 years ago. Sitting in my home office in Lincoln Park, surrounded by industry awards and consulting contracts that had grown from the reputation I'd built, I reflected on how dramatically everything had changed since that rainy Tuesday morning when David Morrison slid a termination package across a conference table. The woman who had walked out of Midwest that day with a cardboard box and wounded pride had evolved into someone the insurance industry now recognized as a transformational technology leader. The consulting practice I'd established, Chen Technology Solutions, had grown beyond anything I'd initially envisioned. What started as emergency assistance for Midwest had expanded into comprehensive technology governance consulting for insurance companies, financial institutions, and healthcare organizations across the Midwest and beyond. The methodologies we'd developed during Midwest's crisis had proven universally applicable to organizations struggling with the intersection of complex technology and mission-critical operations. The client roster read like a directory of regional business leaders. Lakefront Financial had engaged us to redesign their entire customer data architecture after their existing systems failed a federal compliance audit. Great Lakes Medical Group brought us in to develop integration strategies that would allow their multiple clinic locations to share patient information seamlessly while maintaining strict privacy protections. Prairie State Manufacturing contracted our services to create predictive maintenance systems that would prevent the costly equipment failures that had been disrupting their production schedules. Each engagement reinforced the fundamental lesson that David Morrison had learned too late. Sophisticated technical infrastructure requires sophisticated technical leadership. Organizations could not simply purchase off-the-shelf solutions and expect them to address complex industry-specific requirements. Custom systems demanded custom expertise, and that expertise commanded premium compensation for the value it delivered. The financial transformation of my professional situation had been remarkable. The equity stake Ellen Rodriguez had negotiated as part of my return to Midwest had appreciated substantially as the company's performance exceeded industry benchmarks year after year. The consulting fees from Chen Technology Solutions generated revenue that far exceeded my previous salary. Speaking engagements at industry conferences and teaching opportunities at business schools provided additional income streams while enhancing my professional reputation. More importantly, the work itself had become increasingly strategic and intellectually challenging. Rather than maintaining existing systems or solving routine technical problems, I was now designing organizational capabilities that would determine competitive positioning for years to come. The projects required deep understanding not just of technology, but of industry regulations, business strategy, competitive dynamics, and organizational change management. The speaking circuit had opened doors to audiences and opportunities I'd never anticipated. The keynote presentation I delivered at the National Insurance Technology Conference, titled Beyond Cost Cutting, Technology as Strategic Advantage, had been viewed online by over 50,000 industry professionals. Harvard Business School had invited me to teach a case study based on Midwest transformation to their executive education program. The MIT Technology Review had featured my governance frameworks in a cover story about technology leadership in regulated industries. These platforms allowed me to share the hard-earned lessons from Midwest's near-catastrophic crisis with other organizations before they faced similar challenges. The recurring theme in my presentations was that technology decisions made in isolation from business strategy and technical expertise almost inevitably created more problems than they solved. Cost reduction initiatives that ignored system complexity and knowledge requirements usually generated expenses that far exceeded any savings achieved. The professional relationships that had emerged from this work were equally valuable. Board positions at 2 regional technology companies provided opportunities to influence strategic decisions at the governance level. Advisory roles with 3 venture capital firms focused on enterprise software gave me insight into emerging technologies and market trends that informed my consulting practice. Membership on the State Insurance Commission's Technology Advisory Panel allowed me to contribute to regulatory frameworks that would shape industry practices for years to come. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my evolved career was the mentoring relationships with younger technology professionals who were navigating similar challenges in their own organizations. The emails and LinkedIn messages from women in technology who had read about Midwest transformation and wanted advice about advancing their own careers had grown into an informal network of mutual support and knowledge sharing. Sarah Kim, a database administrator at a regional bank, had reached out after attending one of my conference presentations. She was facing pressure from new management to migrate critical systems to cloud-based solutions without adequate assessment of security and compliance implications. Using the governance frameworks we'd developed at Midwest, she was able to demonstrate the risks involved and negotiate a more gradual transition approach that maintained system stability while achieving cost objectives. Maria Rodriguez, a systems architect at a healthcare organization, had implemented our documentation and knowledge transfer methodologies when her department faced budget cuts that would eliminate 2 senior positions. By ensuring that critical knowledge was properly distributed among remaining team members, she prevented the operational disruptions that typically accompany workforce reductions in technical departments. These mentoring relationships illustrated an important dimension of professional growth that I hadn't fully appreciated during my earlier career. Individual success in technology leadership wasn't just about solving immediate problems or advancing personal objectives. It was about developing and sharing approaches that could help entire industries make better decisions about technology investments and organizational capabilities. The broader impact of Midwest's transformation story had rippled through the insurance industry in ways that continued to surprise me. The case study had been adopted by 3 business schools as required reading in their technology management curricula. Industry publications regularly referenced our governance frameworks when discussing best practices for technology leadership. Competitors had attempted to recruit key members of Midwest's technology team, hoping to replicate the capabilities that had created such competitive advantages. Midwest itself had continued to exceed performance expectations across every metric that mattered to stakeholders. Customer satisfaction scores remained in the top 5% of regional insurance providers. Employee retention rates in technical departments were the highest in company history. Operational efficiency improvements had enabled premium growth in profitable market segments while maintaining underwriting discipline that kept claims costs under control. The company's reputation for technological sophistication had attracted partnership opportunities that wouldn't have been available to a traditional regional insurer. Integration with national networks for specialized coverage types allowed Midwest to compete for business that had previously been accessible only to much larger organizations. Data sharing agreements with industry research organizations provided market insights that informed strategic planning and product development initiatives. Ellen Rodriguez had been promoted to regional president for the parent company that had acquired Midwest, largely based on the exceptional performance improvements achieved through technology-enabled operational excellence. Her leadership philosophy, which emphasized collaborative decision-making and strategic investment in technical capabilities, was being implemented across multiple subsidiary companies. The approaches we had developed together at Midwest were scaling to impact thousands of employees and hundreds of thousands of customers across the regional insurance market. David Morrison's professional trajectory had followed a different but equally positive path. His experience with Midwest's technology crisis had taught him valuable lessons about operational complexity and the importance of technical expertise in business decision-making. He had leveraged these insights to develop a specialized consulting practice focused on operational efficiency improvements that explicitly avoided technology oversimplification. David's consulting work now emphasized collaborative approaches to cost optimization that brought together technical and business perspectives before making implementation decisions. His clients appreciated his understanding of both the potential benefits and hidden risks of operational changes. The humility he had gained from the Midwest experience made him more effective at listening to subject matter experts and incorporating their insights into strategic recommendations. We had collaborated on several projects where clients needed both operational strategy and technology implementation expertise. David's business analysis and project management capabilities complemented my technical architecture and system design skills effectively. The professional relationship that had emerged from our adversarial beginnings demonstrated how organizational learning could transform individual careers and create new opportunities for value creation. The technology governance framework that had emerged from Midwest's crisis had been refined and enhanced through implementation at dozens of other organizations. The basic principles remained constant. Technical decisions require technical expertise, complex systems demand comprehensive understanding, and sustainable solutions must balance efficiency with reliability and security. But the specific implementation approaches had been adapted to different industries, organizational structures, and regulatory environments. Financial services organizations dealing with federal oversight requirements needed governance frameworks that emphasized compliance documentation and audit trail capabilities. Healthcare systems required approaches that prioritized patient privacy and data security, while enabling clinical collaboration and research applications. Manufacturing companies focused on operational reliability and predictive maintenance capabilities that could prevent costly production disruptions. Each industry adaptation had contributed insights that improved the overall methodology. Healthcare privacy requirements had led to enhanced data access controls that proved valuable for financial services applications. Manufacturing reliability standards had inspired redundancy approaches that benefited healthcare system implementations. Financial compliance frameworks had created documentation standards that improved technology management across all industry sectors. The research and development work required to continuously improve these methodologies had become a significant component of Chen Technology Solutions' value proposition. Rather than simply implementing existing approaches, we were constantly developing new techniques that addressed emerging challenges and opportunities. Artificial intelligence applications in risk assessment, blockchain technologies for data integrity verification, and cloud computing architectures for scalable processing capacity all required governance frameworks that hadn't existed when we first developed our approaches at Midwest. The academic partnerships that had emerged from this research work provided opportunities to test new concepts and methodologies in controlled environments before implementing them with client organizations. Graduate students at Northwestern and University of Chicago were conducting thesis research on technology governance frameworks under my supervision. Their work was generating insights that enhanced our practical consulting methodologies, while contributing to the broader academic understanding of technology leadership challenges. The venture capital advisory work had provided exposure to emerging technologies and startup companies that were developing innovative solutions to the kinds of problems that had created Midwest's crisis. Investment decisions required evaluation of both market opportunities and technical feasibility, combining business strategy with deep technical understanding in ways that paralleled the governance challenges faced by established organizations. Several portfolio companies had engaged Chen Technology Solutions for strategic consulting that helped them develop enterprise software solutions that would be more easily adopted and maintained by client organizations. Understanding the implementation challenges that enterprises faced when deploying new technologies allowed us to provide valuable guidance to software companies seeking to improve their market penetration and customer success rates. The intellectual property that had emerged from this work was becoming valuable in its own right. 2 patent applications had been filed for governance methodology innovations that could be licensed to software companies developing enterprise management tools. The frameworks and assessment instruments we had developed were being incorporated into commercial software products that would make sophisticated technology governance accessible to organizations that couldn't afford comprehensive consulting engagements. The publishing opportunities that had grown from my industry recognition were providing additional platforms for sharing insights and influencing best practices across multiple sectors. The book proposal that Harvard Business Review Press had accepted, tentatively titled Architecture of Trust: Building Technology Leadership in Complex Organizations, would synthesize the lessons learned from dozens of consulting engagements and provide practical guidance for executives navigating technology decisions in mission-critical environments. The book project had required extensive research into organizational behavior, change management theory, and technology adoption patterns that had deepened my understanding of why some technology initiatives succeeded while others failed catastrophically. The academic literature revealed patterns that explained many of the challenges I had observed in consulting engagements and provided theoretical frameworks that enhanced the practical methodologies we had developed through trial and error. Writing for publication had also improved my ability to communicate complex technical concepts to non-technical audiences, a skill that proved valuable in consulting engagements, where success depended on gaining support from executives who needed to understand the strategic implications of technology decisions without becoming experts in technical implementation details. The international opportunities that had emerged from this reputation were expanding the scope of my influence beyond North American markets. European insurance companies were implementing variations of our governance frameworks to address regulatory requirements that were similar but not identical to those in the United States. Asian financial institutions were adapting our risk assessment methodologies to cultural and regulatory contexts that required different approaches to organizational decision-making. These international engagements were providing insights into how cultural factors influence technology adoption and governance practices. Collaborative decision-making approaches that worked well in American organizational cultures required modification for companies where hierarchical authority structures were more pronounced. Documentation standards that satisfied American regulatory requirements needed enhancement for European privacy regulations that were more stringent and comprehensive. The global perspective that was emerging from this work was influencing how we approached domestic consulting engagements as well. Best practices from European data protection frameworks were improving privacy and security approaches for American clients. Asian manufacturing quality control methodologies were enhancing operational reliability standards for service industry applications. The cross-pollination of ideas across international boundaries was accelerating innovation and improving outcomes for all participants. The personal satisfaction that came from this expanding influence extended beyond professional achievement to a sense of contributing to positive change in how organizations approach technology leadership challenges. The methodologies we had developed were helping companies avoid the kinds of crises that had nearly destroyed Midwest's operations. The governance frameworks were enabling better strategic decisions that created competitive advantages rather than operational vulnerabilities. The financial rewards had certainly been gratifying, but the intellectual challenges and social impact were equally meaningful. Working at the intersection of technology, business strategy, and organizational behavior provided constant learning opportunities and exposure to diverse perspectives that kept the work intellectually stimulating. Contributing to the professional development of other technology leaders through mentoring, teaching, and publishing created a sense of purpose that went beyond individual career advancement. The network of professional relationships that had grown from this work was becoming a source of ongoing opportunities and collaborative projects. Former consulting clients were referring new engagements and inviting participation in strategic planning initiatives. Academic colleagues were proposing research collaborations that could advance both theoretical understanding and practical applications. Industry associations were requesting contributions to best practice guidelines and regulatory comment processes. As I prepared to attend Midwest's Excellence Awards dinner, where I would be recognized for transformational contribution to operational innovation, I reflected on how completely my professional situation had changed since David Morrison's cost-cutting initiative had eliminated my position 2 years earlier. What he had intended as a routine personnel reduction had become the catalyst for career transformation that exceeded anything I could have imagined, while working within the constraints of a traditional employment relationship. The lesson that emerged from this experience wasn't about revenge or vindication, although both had certainly occurred in satisfying ways. The deeper insight was about the hidden value that exists in specialized expertise and institutional knowledge, and how that value becomes visible and marketable when individuals are willing to take the risks associated with independent professional practice. The crisis that David's decision had precipitated had forced me to articulate and demonstrate the value of capabilities that had been taken for granted when they were embedded within a traditional employment structure. The consulting practice that emerged from that demonstration had created opportunities to apply those capabilities more broadly and strategically than would have been possible within any single organization. The governance frameworks and methodologies that were now influencing technology decisions across multiple industries had grown from the specific lessons learned during Midwest's near-catastrophic system failures. The expertise that had seemed valuable only within the context of Midwest's particular technical environment had proven applicable to the fundamental challenges that all complex organizations face when making technology decisions. The speaking, teaching, and publishing opportunities that had emerged from industry recognition were providing platforms for influence that extended far beyond individual consulting engagements. The mentoring relationships with younger technology professionals were creating networks of collaborative support that would continue generating positive impacts long after my own career had concluded. Standing in my home office, surrounded by evidence of professional success that had grown from apparent professional disaster, I realized that David Morrison's termination decision had ultimately been the best thing that could have happened to my career. His attempt to reduce costs by eliminating my position had forced me to discover capabilities and create value in ways that never would have emerged within the constraints of traditional employment. The irony was that Midwest had ultimately benefited as much from my departure and return as I had. The crisis that had resulted from David's decision had created opportunities for organizational learning and capability development that positioned the company as an industry leader in ways that wouldn't have been possible without experiencing and overcoming near-catastrophic failure. The evening of Midwest's Excellence Awards dinner. As I walked into the elegant ballroom where colleagues and industry leaders had gathered to celebrate exceptional achievements, I understood that the real victory wasn't about personal vindication or professional success. It was about discovering that expertise and knowledge, when properly applied and communicated, create value that benefits everyone involved in the process. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.